So hi everyone and welcome. I'm sorry to anybody who was messed up about because of the confusion with the time on Zoom and the time listed on the flyer, but it looks like pretty much everyone who registered is funneling in now. So I'm really glad that you're all able to make it. Today's presentation is going to be the second for the Animals and Society Colloquium series. So I'm really happy that you all can be here as we begin this series. The first talk went really well, and I know this one's going to go really well too. And so if any of you have work that you might want to present to your colleagues, feel free to get in touch with me and let me know. Today's presentation is called Moving from the Muddy Middle, Teaching Pig Production. And our presenter today is Seven Mattis. And Seven Mattis is an assistant professor at the Center of Integrative Studies at Michigan State University. Seven also earned her PhD and her master's degree from Michigan State University in the Department of Cultural Anthropology. She's been doing a lot of fascinating work lately. She's done some work on animals and disasters, as well as work in animals with the COVID-19 pandemic. And today I'm excited to have her present something that I think a lot of us face when we're doing work in human animal studies, where we find ourselves confronted with wanting to move the dial and make a difference, and having to work with people across the aisle from us, and also thinking of the best ways to help educate others in our disciplines and our students as well. So I am very proud and excited to present Seven, and so I will turn it over to you.
Hello, it's awesome to see a lot of your faces, especially the familiar ones. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Can you all see that? Cool. So thank you all for coming on a Monday. I am going to be talking about a topic that I am very fired up about in so many ways, primarily because it's an awesome pedagogical project that I love to share, but also because it can be challenging and difficult, as well as rewarding and exciting. And so I would love to hear from other people who have worked in similar contexts or in any kind of context where you work across the aisle. And so the focus here will be exactly that. I'm talking about moving from the muddy middle, so working across the aisle to accomplish maybe similar goals or maybe fight similar enemies and so on, and all of the awesome stuff you can learn in between and all of the challenging moments. So let's crack into it. So I'm gonna do a very loose organization here. So first, ask the most important question, which is why work across the aisle? Because when you do this work, you have to want to, and that first question is key. And then I'll talk about the what, which is the pedagogical project that I'm working on this semester called the Pig Studio. And then some of the key tools and skills that we've gained this semester, both as instructors and that we're trying to teach our students in doing all of this work. And then finally, asking the doubts and questions that have arisen throughout all of it, and probably will continue to arise. We have 3 weeks left of the class. This is one of our piglets here. So the first question being, why work across the aisle? So because my work is at the intersection of disaster and natural hazards research, as well as human animal studies, for me, it's a very easy answer, which is that you don't always get to decide who you work with. I write here that it's a privilege to only work with those who share your values and lifestyle, but honestly, it's also kind of a hindrance. So I don't know where that really falls. But given my focus is on the situation of what happens to non-human animals in disasters, there's a lot of skills that I am personally have to work on and still struggle with in regards to finding common ground with people with completely different ideas about what should happen to animals, along with all of the other complicated stuff that happens in a disaster context. So for example, that could include an example where, say, a cow, a bunch of cattle is in line of where a flood might take place. Now, the conversation is probably not going to include questions about whether or not that cow should be removed from that zone of danger because they are economically significant to the person who owns them, or because they're intrinsically valuable. That's not going to really be part of the conversation. The conversation will be in regards to the logistics of ensuring their safety. The hard part will, of course, come if the answer is that it's not economically viable to ensure their safety. And there you have to find other common ground and strategize in different ways. So for me, it's a very easy answer. You don't always really get to choose, but you do need those skills. For some other reasons, especially for those that don't work in disaster, and I could probably do a 5-hour lecture on this, so I'm just going to talk about a couple of the big ones, is given that I'm a cultural anthropologist, easily every semester, at least once or twice, I'm going to be starting off the semester teaching about cultural relativism and about cultural differences and cultural understanding, and talking about how when we think about all those major differences we have in terms of how we interact with non-human animals or how we interact with the environment in general, that a lot of that comes down to our cultural upbringing. So that when we look at, for instance, why somebody might look at a cow a little bit differently than we might, it's not necessarily from a place of hatred or evil or any of that negativity, but just cultural differences. Maybe they see the cow as an object, whereas we see them as a subject. We can talk from that space and move forward rather than from some of those negative spaces. So very basic Anthropology 101. But also, if you guys have not seen Adichie's The Danger of a Single Story, go and Google it right after and watch it. It's so good. I probably use it in all of my classes, regardless of the subject at this point. And Adichie's Danger of a Single Story is about exactly that. What happens when we only have one story, one idea, one stereotype or assumption about an entire group of people, or in my world, an entire species. For example, thinking that all wolves are dangerous, or all pigs are dirty and stupid, or all people in Africa are poor, as Adichie talks about. That danger of a single story is easily fixable with education and knowledge. I also write about Haraway's perspective on working with oddkin, about how when we attack some of these huge wicked problems, these ones that require a lot of management from different angles, a lot of solidarity from across the aisle in terms of humans, animals, species, and so on, as well as those in other disciplines, the importance of working together, to going from all angles and kind of putting aside some of our differences to attack similar enemies. So one of the other big inspirations here, and I do want to note before I go to the next slide, that despite all of these things that I write about and I teach about and I talk about passionately, I struggle with all of these things. This is a continuous, ongoing battle for myself as well, even though I teach it. So another big one is following the summer of 2020 and all of the work with Black Lives Matter. I've been following a lot of phenomenal Black women activists, especially in George Floyd Square, regarding how to enact systemic and institutional change. So I've been incredibly inspired just watching them do this work from inside the systems that they intend to change, both for short-term harm reduction and long-term change in general. Just learning basic lessons like avoiding pedestals of purity. You can shout and yell as much as you want from a pedestal of purity, but it won't necessarily always touch the ground. Avoiding things like polarization and binary thinking, closed doors, all of that blocking off of potential for movement when you could move forward from certain spaces and certain angles. One of the big things that I found in following these women is that in a lot of cases, and a lot of the cases that I've experienced, you'll often find allies, unexpected, unlikely allies. And when I say allies, I don't necessarily mean they're going to agree with you entirely. They're going to be just like you. But again, you might have similar goals. You might have similar enemies. You might have maybe a tiny little goal along the path in which you're going to that you can work together to achieve. So I really love this quote from Cory Doctorow, which is, "We may not agree on the destination, but we can walk part of the way there together. After that, we'll see." So while this is all stuff that is kind of a given, it's all just me talking about awesome stuff that other people have done. It's Anthropology 101. I do want to note that it's a special sort of situation when it comes to animal production, because the work that I have done and I have experienced in regards to animal production or working in animal rights, animal liberation spaces, I have encountered the most profound closed doors, the most deeply misinformed stereotypes, the most dangerous of single stories, and a lot of just assumptions and judgments on both sides of the aisle. And so I wanted to ask, why is that? Why is it that this particular issue is particularly difficult to work across the aisle on? And one of the big pieces of that puzzle is perhaps our societal disconnect from animal production in general. So we live in a post-domestic world where the realities of animal production are out of sight and out of mind, though I'm sure for most people on this talk, not really out of mind. We probably think about it way too much. The divide is, of course, problematic for many reasons, but the one I want to focus on here is, again, those dangerous single stories that have arisen on both sides of the aisle. And I say sides in quotes because, of course, there's a lot of variation within each. There's, of course, many different levels and types of work in animal production. And if you're not familiar with the variation and like an animal rights group, just go to a Facebook group for animal rights and ask whether or not Burger King's Impossible Burger is vegan, and just watch the diversity come to light. It's beautiful. So this divide goes back quite far, perhaps really coming into public notice with Ruth Harrison's Animal Machines, which is a phenomenal work all the way back in 1964 that calls out some of the issues with industrial animal agriculture to the general public. Rhoda Wilkie returned to this work in her article, Animals as Sentient Commodities, which is in the Oxford Animal Studies Handbook. And she talks about this start of this dangerous and unrealistic binary perspective, again, on both sides of the aisle, when in fact, of course, the reality is that both animal production workers and those who work in animal welfare or rights are far more nuanced. And bridging this gap is key. So I'm going to talk about what that looks like, because this class, and the reason that I was interested in participating in this class is because it bridges that exact gap. It brings people together who normally would not interact together for a similar goal. So this is the Pig Studio project, and this class takes place here at Michigan State University in Lansing, Michigan. And Michigan State University is an awesome place to do any sort of work across any sort of aisles where animals are concerned, because we have everything. We're traditionally an agricultural college, so we've got large amounts of farms with horses, dairy cows, there's chickens, pigs, of course, and as well as an animal studies graduate specialization, zoology, veterinary program. If you want to do work on animals, MSU probably has something for you. But unfortunately, we don't always necessarily work together. So I was excited when I was approached to participate in this particular class, and this is an experiential learning class. So I want to first tell you about the instructors, because there's 5 of us for 20 students, which is a pretty great ratio, and one that I usually teach classes of 250 with just me. So this is fantastic. So the instructors include me, anthropologist of human animal studies, and very openly teaching classes that criticize animal production in all sorts of forms. There's a program director and assistant director of the RISE program and environmental education program. There is the professor, the chair of swine production and animal agriculture here at MSU, and the manager of the swine teaching and learning facility on campus, which is like a small confined animal feeding operation. So all very different backgrounds, coming from different age groups, different everything. The one thing that we really had in common right at first is that we all wanted to participate in this class. The students are similarly diverse, 20 or so students with no requirements of any sort of experience with animals, with farms, with anything, and most of them had none. So most of them had never even met a pig. The only thing they needed was the interest in exploring food ethics and talking about a lot of these hard issues with animal production and the ability to do so. They were vetted via a survey. And our most important people in this class are the pigs. So what this class did is it took 2 pigs from the confined facility on campus, who we named Dora and Tammy, and moved them to this outdoor pastured pig area on the student organic farm. So this is a picture of where they are. This is their second day on the farm. So these 2 pigs had lived 2 years already in the confined swine facility. So this is their first time seeing sunlight, experiencing grass, being able to do natural pig things like dig around and nest. They would have their piglets outdoors, and the piglets would then, when they reach a certain age, be moved to another pastured setting. So none of them would ever go back to the confined setting. So we were able to see them experience the outdoors for the first time. It was lovely. And we were able to see and experience piglets being born outside and playing and running around and just doing natural pig things. So the mothers, Dora and Tammy, would be slaughtered weeks after weaning. So a couple of big notes on that is that this class takes place within the broader MSU agricultural systems. The pigs removed from the swine facility would be slaughtered regardless of their location, as would their pigs. The only change here, the only change possible here, is that they would be able to live outside and live in a different zone for part of their lives. So there is no option in which they do not become a product. That is who they are constructed in this section, and that was the only option for this class to take place. So this product that they created would be donated to the local food bank and sold to the cafeterias to pay in part for what ended up being a very expensive class. I also want to note that all parties involved in this course who funded it in any form are severely underfunded programs and facilities, and there's not much room for wiggle room. So let's talk about why we do this class. What's going on here? So again, this is an experiential class, so it's not PowerPoints like this. Through their experiences with the pigs, we hope that they dismantle those dangerous single stories we talked about. Firstly, in regards to who are pigs, the entire class revolves around, these are living, thinking, conscious, honestly awesome beings. What's all this stuff surrounding them that puts them in this position? How did we bring them here, et cetera? And let's dismantle some of those stereotypes we have about pigs as well. Humans, we want to dismantle the dangerous stories we have about the humans who work in animal production, 2 of our instructors, and then of course, animal rights scholars and activists, me, and a couple of our other instructors. We want to develop an understanding of ourselves and others' perceptions and ethics, and use this understanding to bridge to work together. So this was the big focus, which is boundary crossing, being able to talk and work together towards similar ends with people who have completely different ideas about who a pig is. And then finally, to understand the broader systems and institutions involved in animal production and how both humans and non-human animals are confined within. And this was a really big one, and I am still taking a lot away from this experience in regards to, I already was very familiar with the confinement of the pigs, the physical as well as other confinement, but I'm still learning about the confinements within animal production. And again, the lack of wiggle room and how we can fight that. So all of this is also within the context of bridging that gap of people who consume animal products and people who produce it and those who oppose it. So the class is still ongoing. It's happening right now. We have 3 weeks left. So we haven't tallied up all of the results and the data, but I'm already very excited about what has come out of this class. But I do want to talk about a few of the key things. So some of the overall things we've watched in this class is the expression of a lot of vulnerability and emotions. It's something I haven't experienced in quite this level in a class before. I've always had students cry in classes, but never quite to this level, as well as with the instructors. A lot of respect of differences. A lot of the students came from all sorts of backgrounds with a lot of different assumptions and stereotypes about everybody involved, and the ability to understand where those ideas come from, understand how other people have different ones, and bridge that and move forward has been phenomenal. So I want to talk about some of the skills that have brought those up. And the first one is this boundary crossing. So boundary crossing is, I'm pulling this idea from an article that addresses boundary crossing as a way to go after those wicked problems, primarily through transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary work. But it also is very relevant for anybody working across any aisle. It doesn't have to be disciplinary. It can be ethical. It can be anything. And the first part of boundary crossing is identifying who the other is. Who is this person or these people, this group you're going to work with? Why are they other? How are they other? And why would working together with them be positive? So for this applied to the pig studio, this would be all of us instructors coming together, recognizing that we really need to work together. We need to write together. We need to come together to solve the problems that we see together in regards to pig production. Coordination, so figuring out how to communicate, because we use a lot of different words and phrases, especially those who work in animal production, that people like me in social sciences don't understand, just as I use things from social sciences they don't understand, and so on and so forth. But the most important part here is reflection and transformation. So being aware of how their practices are not quite what you expected. Hopefully they have the same perspective on your own. Adding all of that nuance and that understanding that complexity to who they are and what they do, and then letting that transform instead of closing yourself off. And these are the key tools for boundary crossing. And I want to note that all of these look easy and none of these are easy. They are incredibly difficult. And if you can do these, you're amazing. I recommend working on these in any context you can. So the first one is simply, in order to boundary cross, we need to be able to have a dialogue with each other. In order to have a dialogue with each other, we need to be able to practice things like radical listening and voicing. Voicing is speaking your truth, not using the royal we, not representing your whole group, not saying, as an anthropologist, we all believe this, or as a vegan, I believe, or we all believe this. Instead, just saying, in my experience, this is what's happening. This is what's going on. And then in return, radical listening. Listening not because you are trying to formulate a reply, not because you have an agenda that you're trying to push and you're trying to figure out what they're saying that you can get into, not to defend your own view, but just truly listening. And that is difficult to do. And it's something that we don't often practice. Respecting and suspending. I want to note that respecting does not mean accepting or agreeing with. Respecting is simply letting them talk, giving them space. And all of this is especially hard when it's talking and listening to people who have completely different backgrounds, experiences, ethics, and views than you, but it's so important. And then suspending, willingness to relax or explore preconceptions or assumptions. It's very easy to walk into a situation when you're working with somebody across the aisle, whatever that means for you, and assuming you already know who they are, why they're doing what they're doing. And often those things you're assuming are not that great. Sometimes you might be right, but a lot of times you're probably not. Or at least there's things you can amend there. So let's talk about some of the context that brought out these skills. And like I said, we're still working on them. I'm still working on them, but the students have been phenomenal in all of this. So the first one I want to talk about is the loss of a piglet named Dave. So again, this class is not a typical classroom setting. We start off in class, do some lectures and some readings, and then we go over to the pigs and we experience life with them. And unfortunately, we had a loss early on. So because this is a pastured pig setting, we do not have gestation crates. Gestation crates were made illegal or banned here in Michigan in 2020, but they still exist at the swine facility here on campus because of, again, funding issues. The head, our co-instructor who runs the facility very much wants the gestation crates gone, but they're waiting on funding for that. So Dora and Tammy are two mother pigs, spent 2 years in that facility inside gestation crates. And so they especially are not familiar with how to not step on or otherwise crush their piglets. And so for the first 4 days, 24/7, we have to be on pig watch after the pigs are born. And so the students and the instructors signed up for 2-hour shifts for 4 days straight to make sure this didn't happen, that their piglets could be moved before the moms could get used to it. After 4 days, both the moms and the piglets are pretty sure of each other, and they probably won't crush each other. But unfortunately, accidents still happen, and that happened with one of our piglets. It also just happened to happen on a Monday night, right before a Tuesday class. And so that Tuesday morning, we found the students had been watching every hour of Dave's progress. We knew something was wrong. We didn't really know what. And what we learned was that Dave had been crushed at some point and he had a collapsed lung. And so Dave was not going to make it. So this was all happening in class where we discovered this, and we called the campus vet, who also just happened to be right there on campus nearby. This was not typical. So we were very lucky that he was able to come right over. And he was also an educator, and he was fantastic. He let the students form a semicircle around him and Dave. They explained the entire experience of what's going on with Dave, why he can't make it, as well as the process of putting him to sleep and then injecting the euthanasia. It was probably the most peaceful, beautiful end. For a lot of the students, it was their first time experiencing death of an animal in general. For many others, it was definitely the first time experiencing euthanasia right there. It was a very emotional moment, and we were very lucky to have everybody be there together to be able to say goodbye. But the most interesting thing about this is what followed. So having 5 instructors from very different backgrounds that we all and that the students are aware of. It gave them a lot of space to ask questions they might not be able to ask if it was just one of us. So for instance, we had a student ask, why didn't we rush Dave to MSU's emergency veterinary care, which was just about a mile away? And the instructor who runs the swine program was very honest. He said that economically, we can't send Dave to intensive care because in this context, Dave is constructed as meat and he is not worth the $1,000 it would take to save him, if that. I'm honestly not sure, given Dave's condition, he could have been saved, but it was important to have that conversation. The instructor also added that at Dave's age, an approved method for euthanasia is blunt force trauma, that it would probably not be likely to bring in a campus vet like we had and euthanize this pig. It would be approved and legal and common practice to simply hit him against the floor. So this was, of course, I love how open all aspects of this class are about the realities of animal production. And the whole point here is to give the students these this wasn't on purpose, but to have students experience these things, give them readings, give them lessons, and then they process, reflect, and report back via video reflection and discussion forums. And they've been phenomenal, and I can't wait to write more about it. One of the other big movements was the swine facility tour. This was, of course, a shock for many of the students who have never experienced a space like this. But it was very important that the tour was led by our co-instructor who runs this facility. I was honestly dreading this experience. A lot of the students had to go slow. A couple of students had to leave. It was a very emotional moment to go through the tour. But because, again, our co-instructor, who the students knew and trusted, was the one leading the tour, and in the following discussion, the students asked all of the hard questions. And this experience not only was important for them to see the contrast between pastured pigs and this, but we learned a lot about that confinement, that the confinement of not just the pigs who are experiencing the most harsh form of confinement, but also the constraints of the technology, the regulations, the cost of change, why things are the way they are, how it got to be this place, and why it's taking so long to move away from it. It was useful for me because I work in a completely different realm than this. And it also gives us space to talk about solutions for moving forward in a more comfortable way for everybody eventually. So this was a very emotional moment as well. And then finally, I want to talk briefly about the slaughter. So students were given the option to witness the slaughter of Dora and Tammy. And this was at a very small facility. It's nothing like what you'd see in an actual industry slaughter place. It was the MSU Meat Lab, and it was just those two. It was a very slow process. It was very educational. The butchers went through every single step, explaining everything, and interestingly, comparing throughout the entire process their bodies to our own. So as they skinned them, they compared it to our skin. As they talked about the heart and the lungs and the spleen, they compared it not only to our human bodies, but how we use these exact organs for human bodies, or how they might take the trachea to have students practice medical things. I'm not familiar with medical stuff, but it was what's it called? The ventilation, how to practice ventilation, because their cords are the same as ours. And so multiple students, as well as me, found that both important because we spent all semester talking about how similar they are to us, but even in slaughter, that they were so similar to us in so many ways. And yet there they were on the slab, and here we were standing next to them. A lot of students have reported back on this, and very emotional and honestly beautiful writings that we're still processing, and I'm still processing. This was the first time I witnessed slaughter as well. It was October 28th, and I'm not sure how long it will take to process it, but it will be a while. So that brings me to the final points here, which is that this class has brought up a lot of questions, a lot of doubts, a lot of concerns, a lot of tears. So I love this experiential course. It's innovative. It's just fantastic for the students. It bridges that gap I tell my students to do. Like I spend every semester telling my students, go to these places, go see what these look like, decide for yourself what you want to do about that, and develop your ethics in regards to having a direct experience. So this class is that direct experience I tell my students to have. At the same time, I'm as an anthropologist, I'm trained to have one foot in, one foot out. I've sat through all sorts of problematic discussions of you know, I've done a lot of projects where people do all sorts of things to animals and sat and interviewed them and smiled and nodded, but this is different because this one felt like I was 2 feet in with them, and of course they would be killed. So these are some of the questions that have come up throughout. There's countless questions, but these are some of the big ones that have come up in my field notes, which is that, is my presence in this project condoning the death of these individuals or otherwise encouraging it? Even though whether or not I'm there, they would die. Would lessons I teach regarding critically thinking about their killability or lack thereof of these living beings or the many problems surrounding their life and death be meaningful in a setting with a death sentence? Because there is no wiggle room about whether or not they can live or die, is it worth even talking about whether or not they're killable? Does this project further objectify the pigs as we use them as pedagogical projects or pedagogical subjects? And of course, the age-old question of individual versus institutional change, because even though this is working towards change for the students, for the instructors, and for the pigs long-term, the individuals do die in the short term. And then finally, the consent or lack thereof for the pigs, because all of the students sign consent forms, we sign consent forms, the pigs do not, and of course, probably should not sign consent forms. So my overall takeaway for this has been that the pigs aren't working across the aisle like we are. They're not doing the boundary crossing. They are literally trapped within. So thank you. I'd love to hear any thoughts or experiences you guys have experienced as well.
Maybe you could stop sharing the screen and then, thank you so much. That was,
There we go.
that was fascinating to hear and to learn from you. Does if anyone has questions or wants to talk, if you want to just raise your hand and I can see. If no one has questions, I guess I'll start. Oh, Erin. And then after Erin, Victoria.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I'm really sorry that I was late. Super apologize. I scrambled to get here and I was like 15 minutes late. So I'm very sorry if you covered this at the beginning of your presentation. I am wondering about, so in sociology, like there can be a lot of pushback when you do research, like you said, that kind of breaches the reform versus abolition area. And I'm wondering if you've experienced the same in anthropology. And also I love that the transdisciplinary element of your work is like super great. I love that. And yeah, I'm just wondering about pushback that you've experienced within the animals and society community.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the anecdotes that I didn't add, but because I was short on time, the first time I practiced this, going through this, I had like an hour of stuff, so I cut a lot of it. But that's part of it, is that I was going to share an anecdote with Cam, actually, that we had when we did our first experience with the pig project, which was quite different from this. It was just a side project of comparing the pastured pig setting with the swine facility. And there is quite a lot of, it was a very shocking moment where we went to give our presentation on this awesome project at the time, but the reaction from it was an animal studies conference, the entire reaction was extremely negative, and they did not talk about the actual project at all, about any of our findings or our results. It was just a question of, so the pigs died. The pigs died. Why didn't you just steal them from a van? And it was shocking. I wasn't expecting that, because it was one of my very first conferences. I was a young graduate student, but I also was new to navigating the animal studies community. And this was a critical animal studies conference. And so that has been on my mind since, even since I was approached to do this project. I was thinking, well, how will this present to other people? Which made me even more want to talk about it with everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Victoria, did you have a question?
Yeah, first, I just wanted to say thank you so much. That was just a very powerful and moving presentation. And I'm so thrilled to know that a project like yours is happening. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more towards the end there, you closed talking about this kind of age-old debate of individual change versus institutional level change. And I was wondering if you could just speak to that a little bit more in terms of your project and what you might see as some avenues for this project being able to maybe even bridge that in terms of making it both and maybe in terms of able to do both individual level as well as systemic sort of changes, and what changes you might think might be possible.
That's a great question. And that's one of the ones that we've, as a team, have hoped to move forward on as well, because when I first joined this project, it was just one semester, but we're already talking about doing it in the future. And one of the biggest changes or biggest transformations that we've experienced as boundary crossing with each other as instructors is seeing all of the obstacles on everybody's side. And so seeing all of the obstacles and seeing them again from all of our different angles has allowed us to find different ways to move past them that we might not have seen before because we're looking at them from our narrow perspective. And for instance, the broader institutional changes that we are hoping for is, first of all, just the fact that we can work together on these issues, whatever that might be. Like for instance, how to remove gestation crates from the swine facility, how to get this project going at the student organic farm in a longer term way with funding, how to get more support throughout the institution, but also, of course, through our students, because our students are the main focus of this particular project, and everything that they're learning in this class, they're going to take away. And they come from all sorts of majors, from majors I honestly didn't even know we had on campus. And of course, the stuff that they're taking away, we hope for them to move on and to help not only with themselves, but of course, in encouraging those conversations as they move on. It's one of their assignments during Thanksgiving was to bridge or have a boundary crossing conversation with a family member about food ethics, about issues with animal production. Very excited to see how that goes. But in general, longer term, of course, my ideal situation would be that in the short term, we find a way where the pigs do not have to die, or do not have to be slaughtered. And finding that method will include all hands on deck from all angles and all perspectives.
Liz, you have a question. Oh, there you
Sorry
go.
about, yeah, thank you. Sorry. Hey, thank you. That was so interesting. And it really warms my heart to know that these kinds of courses are being taught. And it was amazing because what you were talking about, like, I just had a conversation with a philosopher at my university and we're talking about ways to bridge. So it was so timely. But I guess I just had a question about Dora and Tammy and kind of how that worked. I assumed that they were chosen because they were about to give birth. And so it was kind of the right life cycle phase. But I wondered whether they had an opportunity to develop any social bonds. I just remember when I first started visiting a farm sanctuary, I didn't realize that, pigs have families, in that they don't all get along with each other, right? So you have to like separate the different families from each other because it's a whole social, system. Were they together long enough, to kind of experience that? And did the students get to see that part of them?
That's a great question. So first I want to know on your first point regarding why they were chosen. So because of the way the swine facility is set up, it's very much on a cycle. So all of the sows are going to be impregnated about the same time via artificial insemination. These two were chosen for two reasons. First of all, because they had 2 previous pregnancies there and they had no problems. And so we were looking for a little bit of an easier situation. But second of all, the previous year when this class took place and I wasn't a part of it, they had pigs who had been there for 4 years. And when those sows were brought out to the pastured setting, I don't know if it's the right word to use because I'm not, again, a pig farmer by any means, but they lacked curiosity. They were scared. They just stood still. They had been in those crates for so long that they weren't really capable of experiencing the pastured setting in full. So this time it was pigs who had been there for 2 years and they immediately took to everything. They immediately just brought in, they wanted all of the sun. We had to put suntan lotion on them because they could not figure out that sun is bad. They've never experienced it before. It was beautiful. But the other point being that, yes, they absolutely developed a bond. Sometimes that bond was, we don't want to be roommates right now. But other times it was, they had a motherly connection. They were both going through pregnancy in a very hot summer. And when their piglets were born, it became a little bit better, a little bit easier for them to interact. But we did have a moment where we had to separate them when they were at the height of pregnancy. And of course, if you've ever been pregnant, I've heard it's rough to want to be around anybody, especially another 600-pound mom. A great question. Yeah.
So I am pregnant right now, by the way. And so it's rough to be around anyone sometimes. So, you know, this really, I think it would be hard to be someone in this field and not just be self-reflective about our own experiences and sort of the things that we've done in our careers and our activism or what have you. So one of the things that we have a human animal studies minor that we started on my campus. And one of the lines that we drew was we really wanted biology students into this interdisciplinary minor, but we wouldn't allow the Bio 101 class in unless they offered alternatives to vivisection projects. So one of the lines that we drew as organizers of this minor was that no animals could be killed because we just personally couldn't face that as individuals. So I'm wondering for someone like you, I know how we thought through the process. We didn't try these things that you're suggesting we try with boundary crossing. But I'm sure some of the same emotions and feelings are shared between what we were thinking and your position, knowing that you'd never witnessed a slaughter and that you generally don't support some of these activities. So I'm just wondering how it is for you as a person individually to maneuver accepting some of these activities that viscerally go against the things that you feel are okay, and what is the thing that drives you to be willing to go ahead and do this again?
That's a good question. And honestly, the big thing this semester compared to say when I worked with Cam on the Pig Project way back in 2011 is that I'm teaching. This is pedagogically important to me, but watching the student responses and experiencing it with the students, because the students are just as diverse as we are. We have, I think, 3 vegetarians on there, as well as people that are all sorts on the ethics line. But talking through it with them, being there with them when they cannot handle it, because there has been a lot of grief, not just with the slaughter, but with the loss of Dave and a few other, just the continuous bond the students have this semester. I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but at least this semester, a lot of the students are dealing with a lot of mental health issues because of just coming out of the pandemic. And a lot of the students bonded closely with the pigs. And it was a way for them to kind of get away and find that comfort that maybe they didn't have on campus for the first time in 2 years. And so every single moment of that bond and that experience directly with the pigs was continuously met with that awareness of it's got a death sentence, or the death sentence here. And so talking with the students through this whole process has helped them, hopefully, as well as it's helped me. But of course, it's also those short-term moments of remembering these pigs get to be outside, these pigs get to experience something they wouldn't otherwise. And long-term, this will lead to better changes. But it has been, like, I would be lying if I said there has not been a lot of tears.
A second question I had, since no one else is raising their hands, is you said that the piglets get to stay in pasture, but they will ultimately be slaughtered as well, right? As part of the
So they ended up getting transferred to a person who went through the student organic farm program and started his own pastured setting over, I think it's about an hour away. And he has an Instagram. He sends us pictures. It's kind of like an adoption, but it's obviously not very different than adoption. But the students just love watching and following them on Instagram and seeing where they are now. And of course, they too will be slaughtered eventually, but not for quite some time.
Does anyone else have questions for Seven or any insights they want to add? Oh, Ken, you're on mute.
Sorry. Hi, Seven. I just wanted to ask a question. Seven was involved in a summer institute that Animals and Society Institute puts on with the University of Champaign at University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana. And one of the things we do with the group of these are folks who are graduate students, mostly in early PhDs in human animal studies. We take them to a farm where they make boutique cheeses and stuff. So it's a goat farm. And it's not very intensive, but we take them there. We like to give them a hands-on experience. And then afterwards, we have a discussion with them. And that's what I wanted to ask about. Was there tension within the group in terms of different positions? How thoroughly was the vegetarian issue discussed? What issues did it raise that were problematic and that you had to basically facilitate as almost like a group facilitator?
So that was an awesome experience. And I remember when I first heard we were going to do that at the ASI Institute, I was concerned and also kind of surprised because everybody at the Institute I had talked to was just so, almost everybody was vegan, very fiercely animal rights. And so I was surprised and also excited. And the experience was awesome. And the thing I really appreciated about it, and which I definitely took lessons from, is when I forgot his name, the guy who ran the farm, just sat down and let us ask questions, even though
Right.
Everybody there many people there were likely quite opposed to the fact that these animals would of course still be slaughtered. And just seeing his openness was incredibly inspiring. The openness and answering the hard questions and being very firm in his own beliefs about where he stands for this while everybody else is as well. It was a fantastic experience.
So is there tension in your group? I mean, you have different positions within your student group. How do they deal with each other?
So because the class is set up the way it is, like from day one, it was a direct discussion about the importance of accepting other views and having all 5 of us instructors talking about where we're coming from and how different we are. I think that's really helped in bringing down the tension because the students are very comfortable and open with saying everything, like things that make me a little concerned, like that there's one student, for instance, who has no problem at all with animal death. And she's very open about it. Whereas other students, cannot even handle a fly being killed in the classroom. There's a lot of variation, but because of the openness of the setting and the very open vulnerability where the instructors cry, the students cry, all of these conversations happen without judgment. And I did not expect that at all. I expected like having to navigate and battle and, resolve things. And that has not happened yet. The fiercest conversation we've had is about cultured meat production and about whether or not that is preferable to other things in terms of climate change. That has been the biggest battle we've had in class, which I didn't expect. But great question.
Carrie has a question.
Hi, Seven. Thanks a lot for your presentation. I think it's really important, particularly in this context of scholars. I'm not sure how to ask the question, but I'm wondering about, I feel like sometimes, particularly in critical animal studies, that death is centered so much that the question becomes death or no death. And sometimes I wonder about how effective that is in terms of making the changes some of us would like to see in animal agriculture. And so I'm wondering, like, in your process of this class, if there are ways in which like other things got centered that created rich conversations rather than, than just the debate of whether animals should die or not die, or they're ours to eat or not ours to eat, did other questions get centered that created some rich conversation and rich sort of ideas about other ways of relating together?
That's a really good question. So yes, absolutely, because I came in focused on death for sure. And that ended up not being my focus. And the students put it the best way. For a short time, they were creating a documentary about the process, and the overall theme started off as death, about the death of the pigs, but it ended up being, what is the meaning of life? Like, I know that sounds very dramatic, but it was, what is the value of a pig's life? What does it mean to be alive as a pig? And that was basically the focus of the class, is what does it mean for them to be here versus over there in the swine facility? What is the difference between those pigs' experiences? And what are the differences that we're experiencing with the pigs as they're alive now? And that especially came up because of that early death of the piglet, because they all experienced that, and it really impacted how we approach the rest of the piglets and the pigs for the rest of the time. And because of that continuous awareness of life is short, and we just came out of, we're still working through a pandemic, and death is in the air. So it's been very much a focus on life, and why is life important, and how should one live? Especially one of the ongoing themes is the caring killing paradox. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. With Wilkie actually wrote about that as well. The caring killing paradox, where you know the animal's going to die, and if you work in animal production, you still have that bond and that attachment, and really bringing that out and focusing on that attachment, not stepping away from it. But if you do step away from it, reflecting on why you have to do so. So it's both there's a lot going on, and I'm very happy that I personally didn't end up focusing on death the whole semester, but it still was a pretty big part.
Thank you.
Hadi, you have a question?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Hadi. I'm a faculty sociologist at Rhodes College, Memphis, Tennessee. I taught introduction to sociology, and Rhodes is a small college with 2,000 students maximums, and mainly privileged students. So they were fine with modules on race and ethnicity and gender. But when it came to animals and society and eating habits like meat and masculinity, there was reaction. So I was shocked that, okay, now you're comfortable with race, a majority white students, you're comfortable with gender and sexual exploitation and all of that, you understand that. But when it comes to eating habits or how we treat animals, you say, okay, that's our red line. And there was a reaction to that. I was wondering if anybody in the audience have some thought on that. Why is that happening?
Did you want to start, Seven?
Yeah, so I have that is a thing I've experienced too, because I first taught I've taught these issues via women's studies class, and that was the most difficult topic for everybody to address. And so now I do the opposite when I teach, is I start with animal issues, and then I use that to teach racism and other those big issues. And I found that actually really opens up spaces to talk about some of these other difficult, perhaps closer issues. But food is like food. If you're talking about animals as food, or animals in general, like that's so close to our heart and our culture and our emotions. And a lot of us, because of that divide, that societal divide where the animal production is so far from us, we have a lot of that difficult cognitive dissonance in between that creates a difficult space to bridge. So one of the reasons the students, I think, reacted so well in this class is because we vetted them via a survey where they just had to answer basic things like, are you comfortable talking about food ethics? Are you comfortable talking about animal death? And if they had a very defensive response, then of course they probably weren't led into the class. So we were lucky in that regard.
Thank you. And we have time for one last question, and Erin has her hands up. So we'll go to you again, Erin.
I'm going to piggyback on what Hadi was saying as far as taking the research that you're doing, Seven, and using it in courses that have students that may not be as versed in speciesism, right? And I'm thinking like with sociology, like I teach sociology of family and then intro at the community college level. And I have a lot of trouble introducing speciesism. And so I know one thing that I want to incorporate from this discussion is what you all were talking about with dynamics within pig families, right? I can take that and I can use it through social construction to incorporate that into that class. And my question is, have you kind of brainstormed on other ways that your research can be applied to seemingly unrelated fields such as sociology of family?
Absolutely. It's my favorite thing. And honestly, the main reason that I got into teaching and ended up loving teaching is because of that, is finding those spaces where you can introduce animal stuff, whatever that might be, to talk about humans, just because it closes that, on that binary gap between humans and animals. And students love talking about animals. And it is difficult to talk about some of the hard things like food, like animals as food and so on, industrial animal agriculture. But you can also use those spaces to remind students as to how close we are to other animals in just about any context. I've never done it with family, and that's an interesting one. I want to do that.
Thank you. Seven, you've been so busy answering so many great questions. You probably don't know what's happening in the chat. So I just want to give you some of the highlights from the chat before we end today, in case you have any final words on it. But Thomas points out that you are one of the best people at teaching large classes. So I just want to make sure that you know that you're recognized for that, so that this is a particularly exciting opportunity for you to be in this small context. And he also pointed out something fascinating, that that this is the first effort to explore pasturing at any U.S. land-grant university. Mm-hmm. Which seems like a great opportunity. And Erin positioned you in part of that conversation as perhaps thinking of you as an institutional insider with animal farming, kind of like paralleling it to how people who oversee animal research, ethics, the IACAC boards, mm-hmm. Being able to get into those boards and have a say there. So those are just some of the highlights from the chat that I wanted to let you in on, in case you had anything you wanted to add about them before we close out today.
So one of the unexpected results of working in this, because like I said, when I first joined, I thought it was just going to be this semester, but it's definitely looking to be an ongoing work, is exactly that. Like the boundary crossing isn't just happening in the class and with students and how to talk to your family at Thanksgiving, but it's also, we're talking about writing papers together and working on projects together beyond the pig project, because we recognized that we saw all of these obstacles. We had all these assumptions about each other, especially, for instance, the one who runs the pig facility. And those obstacles are no longer there. And we have so many similarities about what we want for pigs, what we want for agriculture, what we want for the future, that there's just so much work that can be done just talking with somebody that you probably demonize in another position. So I don't know where it will go, because we're still new to all of this, but I'm just really excited to see what places I can go, what places they can go that maybe we didn't think we could go before.
Well, I'd like to thank you so much for your presentation today. I think that this is such an important thing for all of us to talk about. And I'd like to also thank you for being brave enough to come and talk to us, particularly after hearing about your first experience presenting to an audience on a similar project. So thank you so much for that. And I would like the rest of you to know that if you're interested in presenting in the colloquium, all you need to do is contact me. If you are a member of the Animals in Society section, which you are if you're here, you get a lot of emails from me, Carol Glasser. So just hit reply to one of those emails. We're going to take a little bit of a break for the winter break. And so early February, we'll be having another colloquium, and I will be sure to be sending you all information on that. Maybe a little bit before the holiday season. So thank you again, Seven. This was a wonderful presentation, and thank you to all of you who were able to attend today.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Carol, also. Thanks, Seven.
Thanks, everybody. Great talk.
Have a great day.
Bye, Seven. Bye, everyone. Take care.
Okay.